"George?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "George, what are you doing in my cellar?"
There was a note from my Beth. She said she meets you down here.
"What? What on earth? I've never met your daughter down here." Before I could comprehend what was happening, George lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. Instinct kicked in as I fought to defend myself, but the battle was over almost as quickly as it began. My descent into this nightmare began a little over a year ago, when I inherited my parents' family farm. Trading the chaos of city life for the supposed tranquility of rural Missouri seemed like a brilliant idea at the time. Yet with each passing day, I became increasingly convinced I made a colossal mistake. The animals had been nothing but trouble, and the old farmhouse seemed determined to bleed me dry of every cent I owned. Death and pestilence, I muttered bitterly whenever another animal succumbed or some essential part of the house broke down. But it's the cellar that filled me with the most dread. Those stairs, steep and menacing, seemed to groan and creak under the weight of each step I took. I often feared they might give way entirely, swallowing me whole into the darkness below. And once down there, the darkness seems to have a life of its own. No matter how many times I attempted to fix the wiring, the light flickered and faded, as if mocking my futile attempts. Yet, despite my trepidation, I found myself descending those cursed steps once again. As I reached the cellar door, I noticed the light was already on. I could have sworn I turned it off the night before. "Is anyone there?" I cried out as the old door creaked open. A dimly lit figure stood ominously at the bottom of the steps. My eyes began to focus, and I soon realized it was my next-door neighbor, George. "George, is that you?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. "George, what are you doing in my cellar?" There was no response, only the ominous flickering and fading of the light. Panic began to rise within me as I realized I wasn't alone. "George, this isn't funny," I pleaded, my heart pounding in my chest as I descended the steep and menacing steps. Then from the shadows emerged another figure. Beth, George's 17-year-old daughter, her small frame silhouetted against the faint glow of the bulb. My mind reeled as I struggled to make sense of the situation. George stood stoically at the bottom of the steps, sweat dripping from his brow, and a look of rage engulfing his face as he slowly raised his right hand, revealing a large butcher knife. In an instant, Beth snatched the knife from George's hand. His back arched as he bellowed and lunged toward me, knocking me to the ground. "George!" I cried out as I pushed his lifeless body off of mine. But as I looked up, I saw Beth standing there holding the now crimson butcher knife, her eyes fixed on me with a chilling intensity.
"You killed my daddy,"
she said softly. I tried to protest, to deny the accusation, but the words caught in my throat. How could this have happened? How did I end up here, facing a young girl with blood on my hands? She watched me with a cold, calculating gaze, a smirk forming at the corner of her lips. Finally, the words escaped my mouth. "You did," I screamed.
"Well, yes,"
she said with unsettling calmness.
"but who's going to believe you over me?"